Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Youth Rights Podcast. I am your host, Zane Miller, and today we are going to be talking about parental financial exploitation. We are here with Naira volunteer Kelsey Dusky. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Kelsey. I'm currently a university student and a NIRA volunteer, and glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about parental financial exploitation today, and I've actually been doing a lot of research on this recently. And it's one of those topics that I didn't really think about a lot when I was first getting into it. But when I was doing a lot of research, I found out what it mostly affected. And so there's a lot of instances where children in positions where they generate a lot of revenue or make a lot of money, specifically like child actors, child models, and then, especially recently, with child social media stars, child influencers, there'll be a lot of instances where, the children will be the one generating the revenue. But because of the fact that there's a lot of financial discrimination against youth, where it's like they don't have access to, manage their own bank accounts, they can't, enter business contracts themselves. It makes it to where the parents are the ones in the position having to manage all their finances, manage all their business decisions, and then the parents end up being the one in control of the revenue that the child is making with their work. So there's been a lot of instances, a lot of high profile cases actually, where child actors, when they're with their parents managing all their finances, have actually sued their parents in the future because of the fact that their parents took, in some cases, up to millions of dollars of their revenue and just spent it on whatever, or just not even given it to the child, just kept it all for themselves, and then say they're just using it for management decisions when they were just, funding their lifestyle rather than, giving the money where it rightfully belonged, to the child. So that's kind of the gist of parental financial exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, you see it a lot. The biggest one, like the biggest case I can think of is the actor from Home Alone.
Macaulay Culkin.
Yes, but his family was really poor and they just set him up to act and he was like acting for years and years and they took all his money. Did he end up suing?
He did. So during their custody dispute, he actually sued to remove them, his parents, as his legal guardians because of the fact that they were controlling his money. He was 15 at the time of the case, and basically they were controlling $17 million of his money and just weren't appropriately giving it to him, letting him have control over his own money. So that was, one of the biggest ones. There's also some other ones with Jackie Coogan, which actually had laws put in place because of them. They sued their parents as well because of the fact that their fortune, all of the fortune that they made as a child star, had already been spent by the time they were an adult, and they didn't even get access to any of it. There's some other ones like Gary Coleman, and Aaron Carter, and some other ones, some names that I don't really recognize. But yeah, there's a lot of high profile cases with these celebrities and stuff, which is really, really interesting because it kind of shows that you know it's such an unfair power dynamic because the kid is the one making all the money, they're the ones acting, they're the ones putting in the work and the effort, but then the parents are just kind of taking the money, not giving it to them, and then just doing whatever with it. So that's kind of the biggest issue with this type of parental financial exploitation type of stuff.
Yeah, and it's kind of a thought of if someone can't control their own income, should they be doing it kind of thing? Like, more saying that there should be a way for them to manage their own, like, finances because we have a system set up that parents have control over, like, youth bank accounts and things like that. So they don't have a way to have, like, financial independence. Like, but if you're independent enough to be working, I think you're independent enough to manage your own finances, to manage your own bank account to some extent.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that brings like I think that's the biggest issue that like comes up when you're talking about like, oh, parents stealing their children's money, because it's a common enough issue that happens that parents take the revenue that their children earn for whatever reason to spend for whatever reason, or they don't allow them to have control over it, when in reality, if we're thinking that someone's independent enough to be working any kind of job, whatever it is, then they should be independent enough to maintain a bank account, to maintain their finances.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of it comes because of this like financial discrimination that's placed on young people because of banks. One of the biggest things is, the bank account. So it's like minors aren't allowed to open independent bank accounts in most banks at all if you're a minor. There's very few banks that allow them to do it. Bank of America is one of the best with it, and the youngest they allow you to open an independent bank account is 16. And then other than that, every major bank, if you're under 18, you have to have a teen account. So, which basically is the same as your parents having control of all your money because like you get to have access to the account, but all your parents have managing permission, so they can see everything you buy, they can go in their account, they can remove all your money. I did a whole podcast about this before with like another person where we talked about instances of with those managed bank accounts of like her parent went into her bank account and just removed like thousands of dollars from her. Same thing happened to me with my father when I was a teenager as well. And it's especially a big deal when it comes to like child actors and stuff where they have like thousands of dollars, like even in some cases millions of dollars that they've gotten this fortune from all the work they've been doing, but they're not allowed to control it. Like they're not allowed to have their own independent access to the money that they earned. And like the parents are the ones like they don't, and they're not allowed to negotiate like contracts either. They're not allowed to like get into business contracts. The parents are the ones having control of their labor. The parents are the ones having control of their like bank accounts of, and most of the time the money's going directly to the parents. If it's going to a bank account controlled by the kid, it's not even controlled by them. It's those teen account type things. So I feel like that really is the root of the issue. And the source is the fact that this financial discrimination empowers parents to be able to do this type of theft. It empowers them to be able to do this type of financial exploitation because then it empowers them to be able to like hold money over kids' head. Like they could use it as like a punishment to be like, oh, if the kid isn't doing what they want, then they could just, go in and take money from them as a punishment. And the thing is, they're allowed to do that because of the fact that they technically have legal access to the bank account. So it's like when they take the money from them, that's not technically breaking the law. I mean, you can sue later when you're an adult, but if you're a minor, you don't technically have legal access to your own money. And that type of financial discrimination that's allowed by banks and certain state laws, making it to where like minors can even have bank accounts without parental permission at all. Those type of stuff really empowers these situations, and it's really sad because like when banks look at this, when laws look at this, they really like to group in teenagers and then like young children like 5-year olds into the same boat to be like, oh yeah, a 5-year old can't manage their own money, so it's like, yeah, no minor should be able to have access to an independent bank account, when it's like obviously like 15, 16, 17, like 14-year olds, if you're like responsible and working, you can manage your own money just fine, and you should be able to be allowed to have access to that, especially if you're generating all this money and your parents are the ones trying to take it from you.
Especially if you are able to work, then you're able to do that. And I think it's a whole separate issue of parents like forcing their young children to do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because like if your child's 5 years old, they probably shouldn't be doing all these things because they're dangerous situations. I mean, we hear a lot about predatorial cases on like acting sets and things like that where children get abused and stuff, like they're really young ones, but also like teens and stuff. And my other thought is there's like teens getting exposed to all this stuff, and half of the time it's not their choice. Their parents, it's forced labor. Their parents are like forcing them to earn this revenue as like a child actor or like child influencer or any sort of that. Like a lot of times the parents will force them to work and make the revenue. They guilt trip them into thinking that they have to earn for the family. They have to, like Jeanette McCurdy, didn't her mother force like guilt tripped her into believing that like she had to maintain the income for the family. Like her entire career was the like breadwinning of their family and all that stuff. It was so important.
Wow.
And if she like failed an audition, it would fail their family. And her mother was manipulating her into doing this from such a young age. And on like one hand, if it's the child's independent decision, then obviously they need their own independent account. But parents shouldn't be allowed to force their children into doing labor like this. But it's such a acceptable thing to do, like force your kid to work or something, like force your kid to get a job or anything like that. Like acting or kind of like anything in the media is really intense, and there's like so many layers to it, and you hear about like so many horror stories of all these horrible situations these kids are put into.
Mm-hmm.
With all the drama that got revealed about Nickelodeon, a lot of those kids were put in really dangerous situations, and a lot of those kids weren't. It wasn't their choice to be put in that situation.
Yeah.
Their parents are like forcing them to act or whatever. because they want the money, and then they
Hmm.
don't even get their money.
Yeah.
It's a cycle of loss of autonomy and independence for the youth and children.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of different ways this can happen. I mean, the most famous examples would, be like child actors and, social media stars. But when I was doing research, there's a lot of ways that this type of financial exploitation can happen. And it can happen with instances of child models, child musicians and singers, child athletes, children that are used in like reality TV shows and documentaries, pageants and beauty competitions. And then there's some instances where like children would end up starting like running their own businesses and stuff like that, like small ventures, and like if they end up like selling like crafts or books, like speaking appearances, stuff like that, where they're like used in like branded stuff that they ended up creating. Again, if they do that when they're young, they still don't have access to their own bank account. So if they generate all this money themselves from like whatever they're doing, and then the parent still gets to control it, the parent can then hold it over their head. The parent can like just take the money and spend it on whatever. And that's really the concern with this type of financial exploitation. And there's a lot of other situations too where like you mentioned about parents like forcing the young people to be doing the work. Because I feel like if parents are forcing the young people to be doing some type of work that involves generating money, but then the young person doesn't get any amount of money from, what they took part in, that's in and of itself financial exploitation. So there'll be like some things like fake fundraising campaigns where it's like a parent like uses like a child's story and like or illness, talent, hardship, stuff like that, and like raises money through crowdfunding, but then it doesn't end up going to the child, it just the parents take it. There's a lot of instances with like forced agriculture work, family businesses, stuff like that, where like the parents will like force the kid to be part of the family business, but then won't pay the kid any amount of money at all. So just like, having to be like working on like the farm or something or like from whatever business, but then they won't get any money from it. Um, and then like you were mentioning about like pressuring children into like repeated auditions, performances, content creation, and then just when the parents just take all that income for themselves and stuff like that. There's so many instances of ways that like parents can be like using their children to generate money without the children, getting any of that money or having a choice of like what it goes to. And when parents put their kids through a situation, it like first of all, they're getting the minors getting screwed over because they don't have access to any of the money that they're making, first of all. And second of all, it like kind of can have a lot of negative impacts on their life because if they're being forced to like do work that they don't want to take part in, especially, when how you mentioned about how it can be like dangerous situations or predatory situations, especially with media and stuff like that, they're having to go through all those hardships at the same time. And especially if it's something that they don't even want to do in the first place, but they're kind of just being forced into that like cycle of guilt and manipulation by these parents, it can really have like long lasting impacts on their lives.
Especially, it's just crossing my mind with this is a lot of times in these situations, the parents don't just restrict money, they restrict things like food or just like basic necessities, or they restrict like their day to day life.
Hmm.
Like, they have forced like eating disorders onto their children, like, especially with models or actors or
Mm.
singers or anything like those.
Hmm.
The parents will restrict what they eat. They won't let them eat. They won't let them do XYZ. They have to like work out constantly, have to do all this stuff. They essentially are like forcing an intense like anorexia on them. But
Yeah.
it's not even like the child has the disorder, it's more that the parent is forcing the behavior of the disorder onto them.
Hmm.
And that leaves lasting impacts. A lot of times it will lead to the child developing the disorder later in life, or during the time this is happening. They suffer from malnourishment, they suffer from other like anemia, other conditions that are common with that, hair loss. But it's just common that the parents, they don't just stop with like restricting the finances. That's usually like the first step.
Yeah.
And then it goes into a more like intense abuse of restricting what they eat, restricting what they do, restricting like every their day-to-day schedule just to a T, not letting them do anything. They have to go to work, and then they have to work out, and then they can't eat, then they can only drink this amount of water so they don't gain water weight.
Hmm.
And it causes all these like severe mental issues later in life. And you see it happening with a lot of like it's coming out right now with a lot of actors from like the early 2000s, early 2010s. A lot of the actors are coming out saying that they suffered from this from either their parents or like the adults in charge at the places that they were working taking advantage of them,
Hmm.
taking advantage of the fact that they were a minor and that they didn't have the same independence that adults have.
Yeah.
It kind of brings into that greater issue of they don't have the legal independence to be able to deal with these situations.
Hmm. And there's also these, like, like the mental issues and the psychological aspect, because if you grow up in a home from a very young age of like you're forced to do all these things, and like you're forced to like make all this money, do all this work, especially if it wasn't your choice in the first place, that can like screw someone up for life, because they're constantly like in that like kind of like fight or flight type of mindset of have to do this, and this in order to like appease my parents and stuff. And then, with like there's so many other instances, like especially like, like you mentioned with like the models and stuff, of like kind of like forcing these behaviors on them, which is just really, really wrong. And it goes hand in hand with other in ways of abuse. I think one of the instances was Ariel Winter was a child actor who actually experienced a lot of child abuse as well as part of this, and her mother ended up losing custody of her due to the child abuse, and along with that she was also doing the financial exploitation aspect of just taking all her earnings and then not giving her like fair control over it. So part of the lawsuit was making it to where the mother wouldn't have control of the income. So it just kind of shows that like this financial exploitation and this parental abuse and oppression go hand in hand. Of if the parent is going to be the one forcing the kid to do all this type of work, and restricting their finances and restricting their earnings, a lot of the times they're going to be physically abusive, mentally abusive, psychologically abusive, very overbearing with like the control that they want to have over the kid's life, and it will like really screw someone up with the way that these like long lasting effects can just like kind of like manifest itself.
Yeah, for sure. It can lead to a lot of different disorders, but it also leads to addiction. I mean, we see a lot of drug addiction and alcohol addiction that on the rise, especially with like the cases of like meal restricting that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they turn to drugs to like stay skinny or to stay thin, and then that leads to an addiction because there's like certain drugs that have that effect, obviously, but it's I mean a lot of these child actors we're seeing a lot of like just any like buddy any child in the media fall into like these paths of their parents are doing all these things to them, so then when they become an adult they are still suffering the long lasting effects even though they're finally hopefully free from the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It like still torments them to this day.
Yeah.
And then they're also maybe dealing with addiction that they developed during that time because it was pushed on them by their parents or it was pushed on them because that's what they thought was right to do because of their expectations from their parents or the media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really sad reality that we're seeing like all the rise of like people coming out talking about it, but also the rise of drug addiction and all that stuff just from this industry that is created. And another thing that's just crossing my mind too with this is a lot of there's a sexual exploitation aspect of it too. A
Mm-hmm.
lot, especially with the rise of social media, there are parents that will make their like children like kind of sexualize themselves online and in the media just to like get more views and get more money from it. You know that their parent managed account, like you'll say it in the bio, say parent managed account, and
Mm-hmm.
then you see it's like a provocative thing, clearly trying to get views for that,
Yeah.
and they're gaining popularity and they're benefiting from this, and you can only assume that's from the parents because if it's a parent managed account, if it's a 15-year-old, et cetera, but it's a whole thing that they're allowing like children to be exploited like that too, which is just horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It's I mean the industry itself is corrupt obviously and it's like scary, but the whole aspect of parents having complete control over their children this way leads to them doing like these horrible things in like a power hungry manner,
Yeah.
and it's leading to like these horrible effects on the children, and
Because, they kind of have that overbearing power because, like, if, they're being forced into, like, whatever work they're trying to do, and then the kid's like, "I don't wanna do this. I don't wanna be part of this." Like, what do you think the parent's gonna do? They're obviously gonna, like, start punishing them and start, like, taking away their privileges. Because parents, they have broad authority to do this. A parent can, like, stop a kid from seeing their friends, like, take all their property, take, like, their money, take, like, stuff like that, and then, like, emotional abuse as well. Like, a lot of the times these things aren't like legally considered child abuse to like take away certain like regular privileges, like taking away access to like a room or something like that, like taking a door off the hinges of the thing. So it's like parents can just kind of punish these kids for not wanting to go along with it in whatever way they want, and a lot of the times it's not really considered child abuse, so they can get away with it. So it's like, yeah, if the kid tried to like kind of fight back against that, I guess the parent can do whatever they want to them, and they really don't have a choice in the matter, and that's like the scariest part. But what you mentioned with the social media thing, I think is actually very important, because there's a lot of instances where it's like the parent is managing the social media account and putting their kids into the content, and forcing the kids to be a part of it. If the kids want to be part of it, great, like that's good, like if they want to be part of that, like good. But if they don't and they're being forced to be part of that, it's bad. And it's especially bad when the parents have this like managing access, because then if the content gets monetized, like let's say like a minor creates a YouTube channel, the parent is the one who created the account, but the minor's like the star of the show. That money from ad revenue, that's going straight to the parent, that's not going to the minor, so they can't like have the revenue from the content that they're making. So if they're enjoying doing what they're doing and the parents are like giving them the money for it, then it's like great, sure, like live your best life. But if they're being forced into it by the parent, or the parent like isn't giving them their money, or like is financially exploiting them in this way of like forcing them to be part of it without earning anything from it, that can be where it gets really bad. And I feel like that's one of the things that social media platforms don't consider when they start to put like these really heavy age restrictions on accounts. Like there's been state laws that I've been trying to say that in order for any minor to make a social media account, like the parent has to have like control or like managing access to it. I know like Utah tried to do something like that with like a parental consent of social media law. And there's been like Nebraska and like other places that have been trying to do these like very broad laws about forcing parental managing access to minor social media accounts. And they frame it about like, oh yeah, we're protecting the kids in quotation marks. But realistically, when you think about it, if that means that the kid wouldn't have access to like the account and stuff, which means that it has to go through the parent. So if they're trying to like be part of a social media platform that can be monetized, like YouTube or something like that, when you can be making ad revenue, that means that they wouldn't have any ability to get their own revenue. Like certain states, like I know Minnesota off the top of my head, they actually have a specific statute that says if a minor is 13 through 17, and they own and manage their social media account, they are entitled to 100% of the access, 100% of the earnings, which means the parent can get the earnings. But also that would go to a parent managed bank account half the time, which means then the parent would have access to the earnings. But it's kind of that thing of like, if the minor has control of the account, they should be getting the earnings. But if the social media platform or state laws is trying to make it to where the parent has to have access to the account, then the minor has no way of being able to, like have this independent account with independent access and, independently like earning money from it. So then when the social media accounts are like trying to frame it as, oh, we're protecting kids by having parental control of the accounts, they're actually doing the exact opposite, because they're opening up kids to financial exploitation from parents using them for social media and then not giving them any of the earnings.
Yeah, for sure. And immediately, like, I'm thinking, well, obviously, if it's a parent managed account, then, and if that's the requirement now, that is like just opening the door. It's immediate access to exploitation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's like the direct thing that's happening there.
Yeah.
It's the parent can see if the child actually is able to post independently under the parent managed thing, like the parent allows them to do that. The second the parent sees that the child's doing well, if they are power hungry or they have any of these issues that we see so commonly, they're immediately going to want to take that revenue and start exploiting their child.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we see it's happening all the time. You see all these kids on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, that are just getting exploited. It's getting younger and younger. That I mean, I'm thinking of there's a little boy, I think it's Brian's World.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Ryan's World, he his parents have been forcing him to make like these YouTube content for years. And it started when he was like 4 years old, and now he's way older than that. I have no idea how old he is now, but it's just been forced to do that. And I think it started as the kid had fun with it or something,
Mm-hmm.
but then the parents saw it was doing well, and now they monetized it, and now they keep going, and they're forcing this kid to do it even though he's unhappy with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just these parent like the parent managed accounts, that's exactly the cycle of what can happen. If the kid starts doing content because they like it, the parent sees it's doing well, the parent can start monetizing it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just a direct route.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
really scary actually how easy they are making it for these parents to exploit their children.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that they don't think about because when you think about like child actors, it's like, oh yeah, the parents kind of been the one putting it in them from the start, but it's like if the parent has no original intention of like doing this financial exploitation and the kid just wants, start doing social media content because they enjoy it. And it's like that's good. That's good for, people to start doing social media content because you enjoy it, especially if like you're getting skills from it, like you're doing like video editing, whatever, you're gaining skills from it. Like that's a great thing. But if you start doing well, I mean, if you start being able to like make monetized content, like that's great. And if you enjoy it, that's great. But if the parent sees that and then like and they realize they're like, oh, the family could be making money from it, not just the kid. The family could be making money from it. And they immediately just latch onto this. And then instead of it being a thing of, oh, the kid's doing because they enjoy it, it's the kid's doing because the parent is now like, hey, now you have to do this. You have to make this content. You have to be part of this. You have to be making this money. So then it removes their choice. And then a lot of the times, especially if it's a parent managed account, the kid isn't getting the money for it. He's just not. So then, they don't even get the rewards for the labor that they put into it. So I feel like one of the best ways to actually prevent parental financial exploitation would be to make it to where young people have complete and like managing access of their own social media accounts and like remove any of these policies that like require this parental managing access, especially on social media platforms that's monetizable like YouTube. YouTube's the biggest one that comes to my head, but it's like, yeah, for sure, like definitely make it to where like instead of making passing laws trying to make it to where we're forcing this, make laws with the opposite, making laws to where like parents can't have this managing control over social media accounts, especially monetizable social media accounts for young people, because they start off on this under the guise of protecting the kids, but you're actually creating, like you said, a direct route to this type of financial exploitation for young people.
For sure. And I'm also, when it comes to mind with that, is we also need to fix the bank accounts. I mean, I know that's a separate topic, but it leads right back to this. If a parent manages the bank account, then the child doesn't have access to their own funds.
Mm-hmm.
And social media is like one way they need to prevent that. Not saying that parent managed social media is the best thing or it's a good thing necessarily. I just don't see it as a thing that's going to go away with the rise of how people have been about it lately.
Yeah.
People are really gung ho on it right now. I just can't see it going away. So I think a more realistic option would be to have laws where the parent can't take the earnings from the independent account kind of thing. Even though
Mm-hmm.
that would be tricky with a parent. I Ideally, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have parent managed bank accounts. I mean, bank accounts obviously, but social media accounts,
Mm-hmm.
because those lead to like this whole situation. I
Yeah.
just don't see that being a realistic option
Yeah.
with the world the way
Unfortunately.
it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
But we need more awareness on this topic, like what we're doing right now, awareness that this is something that happened,
Mm-hmm.
so people can start going against it and like noticing the signs and stop giving like revenue to these parents that are like obviously exploiting their children, because you can see the signs
Mm-hmm.
online. Like there's like typically signs that a child's being exploited online, and we need to stop enabling that. And
Mm-hmm.
spreading awareness helps us stop enabling that.
Yeah. And there's a few other things I thought of too with like kind of solutions to the matter. And I think one of the biggest ones is like increasing criminal penalties for financial exploitation. Like I feel like because a lot of the times I feel like, this type of like parental oppression stuff, like, over putting overbearing responsibilities on young people and stuff, if it's not directly physically abusive or like neglectful, a lot of the times it's not considered child abuse. So I feel like definitely like and then like definitely stealing the money is one. Like that should just be completely off the bat. Like it's crazy how there's not laws against that to where like a parent stealing a kid's money isn't just automatically illegal. Like even if it's from the parent managed bank account, Like they justify by like, oh, it's the parent managed bank account, like the parent has access to it, blah blah blah. But like that, even if it's a parent's managed bank account, they shouldn't be allowed to just go in and take the money, especially if it's like something that the kid earned themselves by working. Like that just shouldn't be a thing. Like parents should not be allowed to be able to do that, and they shouldn't be allowed to financially exploit their kids. And it's like, sure, yeah, the kids can sue when they're older, when they're an adult or something, or like sometimes in the Macaulay Culkin case they sued when they were still a minor, but that's really rare, and it's really hard for people to be able to do. The legal system is not friendly to young people like at all, and it makes it to where they, for civil suits especially, a lot of times they can't even sue in their own name. So those are major issues, and I feel like we definitely just need to like crack down on this, because if there starts to be penalties to be like, oh yeah, if you take your kids' earnings that don't belong to you, like that's illegal and you get thrown in jail, that's going to really dissuade that type of financially exploitative behavior. And while it may not solve like the forcing the kids to be part of social media, at least they'll be getting the earnings from it. At least they'll be, have a little bit more semblance. And if we pair that with the bank accounts thing of, at least at the bare minimum, make it to where banks aren't allowed to restrict access to accounts just on the basis of age. Like when you get a credit card, that's the same thing. Like minors, most of the time, can't even apply for credit cards. But it's like you get approved individually by like an individual like person. Like it should be that same type of thing. It should be based on the context of an individual. Like if a minor wants to go open a bank account, it shouldn't be, oh, you're under this age, you're not allowed to. It should be, okay, we're gonna like talk to you and like figure it out, instead of just discriminating based on an immutable factor of, oh, under this age automatically no, because that's just really wrong, especially because there's so many like young people who are mature and who are making money and who can 100% manage their own finances, and they just shouldn't have that privilege taken away from them by these discriminatory bank policies. So if we kind of pair all these things together of like, increasing the penalties for this parental financial exploitation, taking away parent managed accounts, taking away parent managed social media accounts, taking away parent managed bank accounts, stuff like that, we can start to actually have like real protections against it.
No, yeah, for sure. I definitely think that we need to start bringing that. I also think it goes back into bringing more awareness to that.
Hmm.
Or especially if we bring more awareness, maybe more people will vote for laws that help like prohibit this management
Hmm.
that parents have and this control, and then help give consequences to parents who do this, and like to classify this financial exploitation as abuse and like stealing money as abuse, because it is financial abuse. And
Hmm.
while that's not something that a lot of people take seriously, it is a serious thing, because if someone it's exploitation of labor, and that's a very serious issue that we need to solve as a country right now.
And there are certain states that have laws around this. I think there's one in California about like Coogan's law, where they actually make laws in response to this. And normally you think like, oh yeah, this is a good thing. This should be preventing it. But what the laws end up doing, this is really interesting. There's a few states that have it. I think like California, Illinois, um, Minnesota, New York, New Mexico. They have these laws about like minor entertainment or minor performer laws, where they'll make it to where if there's like a child making a certain amount of money from like a performing role, like a portion of the money is then what they say it's saved for the child. And then so you think, okay, yeah, the child gets access to it and the parent can't have any access to it, right? But not really, because the way that they do it is by putting it into a trust account. And they'll be like, okay, a portion of the child's earnings, like 15% or whatever, goes into a trust account in the kid's name. And then once they become an adult, they can access that money. But I think that in and of itself is actually a very ageist way to try to fix the issue, quote unquote. And it's not even fixing it, because I feel like the biggest issue is young people putting in work and not receiving the money for their work because of the parents. So, if a portion of their earnings goes into like a trust fund and the parent's still taking the rest, then the young person is still not receiving the money for their work while they're young. So it's basically saying these laws are basically enforcing this discriminatory idea that the young people aren't even entitled to the money from their labor until they're an adult. And it's like in one instance, it would make sense to be like, okay, if there's like a child actor who's maybe like doing acting when they're like 5 years old, it's like, okay, yeah, they wouldn't really know what to do with the money because they're like a 5 year old. But if it's like a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, they should have access to that money while being still a minor instead of having to wait until you're 18 to be able to do anything with the money. And instead, having to wait for like having to rely again, being forced to rely on your parents to like provide this for you while you're a minor when like we've already talked about, there's a lot of circumstances where the parents will just spend it on whatever, they'll take the money, the kid won't get a lick of it. And then the solution, quote unquote, is, oh yeah, you get it when you're an adult. So then the whole time you're a minor actually doing the work, you're just basically getting screwed over by the system. So these laws, while they're supposed to protect against these situations, really don't. And I feel like that's another aspect that nobody talks about. They see these laws and they're like, oh yeah, this is fixing the financial exploitation, but it's still preventing minors from having access to their own money.
And I think it would be one thing if it was all of their earnings were put in a trust fund.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even that. It's some of them.
Yeah.
It's like a percentage of it. It's a small percentage of it. And I think it enables this idea of children are their parents' property.
Mm-hmm.
That's this idea that we have as a country for some reason, that children are property. So even though it's the child doing the work, because it's like the investment of the parent, they've invested in this child by feeding them, paying for their food, they've invested in them, they are allowed to have access to these earnings. Those are their earnings too, because the parent invested in this child. Even though the parent is just doing their legal obligation of having a child, which is to take care of them.
Yeah.
It's not an investment. A person is not property. It's a child, and if a child is doing work, then a child is doing work, and they deserve their earnings for their work.
Mm-hmm.
And they can argue all they want about how we wait till 18, but if they're going to wait till 18, they better give the child all of the money that they earned.
Yeah.
It's not, this child is not an investment of the parents, then parents get 85% of their money.
Mm-hmm.
No, the child gets all of their money. The person working gets all their money. It doesn't matter if they're a child or not.
Yeah.
That wouldn't fly if it was an adult, so it shouldn't fly if it's a child. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, like imagine if like you're working as like an 18-year-old person and your boss is like, "Oh yeah, here you can have like 15% of your earnings and then 85% just goes to your parent." And it's like, I mean, that's actually kind of how taxes work, but not that's a whole other thing. But, it's that same thing of just basically saying that people aren't entitled of like young people aren't entitled to money. It's like young people aren't it's like young people like are kind of bound to their parents in the way that if they want to have money while being a young person or while even if they're working and like actually generating the revenue, they have to rely on their parents. And these type of trust fund laws are, I feel like, ridiculous because I feel like it doesn't actually solve the problem. I feel like the biggest problem is this financial discrimination. So back on the topic of solutions, I feel like it would be extremely hard, like you mentioned about realistic solutions, like, getting rid of the parent managed social media accounts, getting rid of parent managed bank accounts, even increasing the criminal penalties for financial exploitation. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon, realistically. But at the bare minimum, the age to like access the earnings from the trust fund should at least be lower, like maybe to like 16 or something. That's like the bare minimum. So at least you can get like a kid can get like a Bank of America account independent of their parents, and then have their earnings in there, and then being able to access a trust fund and stuff. That should be the bare minimum of like being able to access your earnings when you're like 16 or something. But what I feel like is the biggest problem is every single law around young people groups like 2-year-olds and 17-year-olds in the same boat. It's like, okay, we have adults and we have minors. We have people capable of making their own decisions and then people who, according to law, aren't capable of making their decisions. When it's like, okay, a 17-year-old can make financial decisions basically the same as an 18-year-old can. And then especially if you're like working and if you've been doing this type of stuff, like you're going to be more independent, you're going to be more responsible, you're going to be able to like better be able to manage your own finances if you've been doing this type of work for a long time. Like if you're like 15, 16, 14, you can probably manage your finances just as well too. And then they just act like, oh yeah, these minors shouldn't have this capability because like, oh yeah, like a 5-year-old or like a 3-year-old couldn't handle it. And I feel like that, just like this grouping of people into this category, is one of the biggest issues that I feel like is facing young people when it comes to financial autonomy and financial independence.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, there's not much difference between a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
But legally, there is such a huge difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absolutely ridiculous. The reality is no, a 5-year-old and a 15-year-old are not the same, and they shouldn't have the same limitations. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a 15-year-old is capable of making their own decisions. Maybe not every single decision is going to be a good one, but they're capable of making more decisions than a 5-year-old is, and it's ridiculous to compare them to. If
Mm-hmm.
you and if you said the same thing about an 18-year-old though, the government says that, oh no, this person can make their decisions, but this 16, 17, 15-year-old can't. It's a ridiculous gap that we have, and we need a more transition period within this big gap between adult and minor,
Mm-hmm.
because it leads to a bunch of 18-year-olds who don't know how to do anything because they weren't allowed to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, myself, I when I turned 18, I felt like the world was flipped upside down because all these things suddenly changed on me because I wasn't allowed to do anything. I wasn't allowed to ever call to make a doctor's appointment. Then I turned 18 and I have to call to make a doctor's appointment. I wasn't allowed to handle my own medications, and now I'm the only one who's allowed to handle my medications. It's a massive flip, and there's a bunch of 18, 19, 20 year olds who don't know what they're doing because they were not allowed access to any of it even partially before. So it's really, I think a really serious issue we have is not having a transition period and not in such a hard line. We need to kind of blur the line between adult and minor a little bit when it comes to all these things.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always go to when we're talking about this type of stuff is like context of the individual. So it's like, what, like I mentioned with credit cards, it's like they look at the context of an individual person before they approve someone to a credit card. But then if you're under 18, they don't even consider you. That should be the same thing. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm 17, I should be able to apply for the credit card and be considered in the same way that like an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old should, using the context of myself as an individual rather than just looking at one thing and that one thing being the age. And it's like people don't want to do that because it's hard. Like it's more difficult to have to actually consider multiple factors rather than just one thing. But realistically, how are young people, like you mentioned, how are young people supposed to like understand this type of stuff when they're not given an opportunity to? And it's like that's where we get these negative stereotypes of, oh yeah, young people are irresponsible and they don't know how to handle their finances. And it's like, okay, well, if you're not allowed to have an independent bank account until you're 18, yeah, obviously you're going to have trouble with your finances when you turn 18. Like it's a cyclical problem because they blame these issues on people and then they use the issues to justify the reasons as to why the people have the issues. It's like it's a cycle. And I feel like that's one of the biggest problems. And it leads into, what we've been talking about this parental financial exploitation. If young people like don't have access to manage their own like business and stuff and like negotiate contracts and especially like if with their labor and stuff, you know, they're gonna when they become 18 and they're not gonna know what they're doing. They're gonna get like exploited by the industry who like takes advantage of them because they're vulnerable. And of course they're vulnerable because they don't really know what they're doing because they never have had the ability to learn what they're doing because they didn't have access to being able to do that. And then same thing with a lot of other issues with like the bank accounts and stuff like that. Like having a parent managed bank account allows parents to just basically take all the money from the kids and financially exploit them the whole time. But we don't look at that issue. People don't look at that issue. They look at it as, oh yeah, a 5-year-old shouldn't be able to have access to manage their finances, so all minors shouldn't be allowed to do that. And that really is the root of the issue. So if we're actually going to fix these type of issues, the way to fix the root of the issues isn't by just like creating trust funds for adults. It's by empowering youth financial autonomy so young people can make their own independent financial decisions without being at the mercy of their parents.
Yeah. It absolutely comes back to youth autonomy and how we prohibit it. As a society, we act like it's this horrible thing that if the second someone under the age of 18 has like a sense of autonomy, they're going to ruin their life. They're going to absolutely destroy everything. And it creates these stereotypes, but it also creates just this group of people who don't know what they're doing. And it is the root of the problem that we need to fix. We need to cut it off at the root and figure out how to get going from here.
But yeah, no, I really do feel like it comes back to this issue of the youth financial autonomy and the financial discrimination that youth face. So if we're going to fix these issues, we have to increase youth financial autonomy. We have to decrease the way that parents have this managing control over every aspect of kids' lives, including social media and bank accounts, stuff like that. We have to increase penalties for parents who financially exploit their kids, for parents who steal their kids' money, who deprive them of their earnings, who force these responsibilities on them when they don't want to be a part of it. And, if we do all these things, we can actually have a productive way of fighting the root of this parental financial exploitation issue. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your time. And hopefully, this was informative for everybody about parental financial exploitation and the real roots of the issue that people don't talk about when states are trying to make protections against it. Protections, quote unquote, which are, entirely ageist. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning into the episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.